This is Let Me Sum Up, your irregular deep dive into classic films about the tension between human progress and ecological integrity. I'm Luke Menzel, recording today on Wurundjeri land, and I'm joined, as always, by my two co-hosts. Global Vice President for Mistletoe and Eggnog at the Let Me Sum Up podcast, Frankie Muscovich. Hello, Frankie.
Happy Festivus, crew. It's nice to be with you, as usual, from Gadigal country, but also in this lovely gelatinous period between Christmas and New Year's where, like, eating and swimming and doing, hopefully, not much of anything kind of morph into each other in this delightful period. Yes, nice to see you.
Too much eating and not enough doing of things may produce a truly gelatinous outcome.
Let's hope not.
And those dulcet tones come from a man who in the last week has experienced the exhilaration of his beloved Soylent Green briefly topping the listener poll set up to decide which movie to talk about on this very episode of the podcast, and also the desolation as Frankie assembled her flying monkeys to stage a successful rearguard action for her preferred movie, Princess Mononoke. That man, of course, is Tennant Reid. G'day, Tennant.
That shattered shell of a man. Writhing in Greek ironic punishment division hell. Yes, that is me. But, you know, onward and upward.
Onward and upward. And there was almost an upset as a member of the EC executive team, Sage Michaels, decided 4 hours before polls closed to launch a campaign for her favourite climate-themed movie. Quite a remarkable result, actually. The day after tomorrow, which she took from 0% at 1:30 p.m. to 24% in the space of 3.5 hours.
Sage set her sights a little higher. Like, she could be president of Syria by now.
I watched that campaign for the movie. Was the day after tomorrow that she was gunning for, and I was remembering bragging to in one of our joint group chats, like, I love our listeners so much that there's not even one vote for that movie. And it proceeded to, like, probably steal a bunch of votes off Tennant's movie, Soylent Green, and then I think she recruited a few noobs as well. But I would observe that, I mean, you refer to them as flying monkeys, Luke, but I would refer to them as loyal and delightful people who stayed true to the gloriousness of Princess Mononoke.
Well, you had your own hashtag. I think it was hashtag Team Frankie, wasn't it?
I love it. Didn't start it. I regret nothing.
All right. Well, you almost tore this little podcast apart. I think we're on a healing journey.
Are we?
All right. Perhaps not. Moving on. For this, our third annual holiday spectacular, we are once again skipping the report and discussing classic eco-themed anime, Princess Mononoke, for better or worse. We also have the third annual Wonkie Award to hand out for Best Climate and Energy Paper. But, of course, there is a steady stream of Boko heading towards our super Summerupperers, and a very special example of that went up in the Boko feed on Christmas morning. Do either of you care to spruik said Boko to the listeners that have not yet signed up for that very special Patreon?
Well, if you check out the stream,
Yes, hang on. We have a new co-host all of a sudden. Who are we talking to?
Well, I'm legally enjoined from revealing my identity, as I'm meant to be in a dungeon deep in the city of Waterdeep for crimes against cheese. But if you are able to subscribe and provide a solid fantasy supporting living to the ongoing adventures of this here podcast, I do believe you'll learn a lot more about cheese and just what kind of disgusting creatures it can be made with the aid of if you are of a sufficiently unethical disposition. But those adventures involved a certain dragonborn sorcerer and a certain Azamar druid and their goat, or the goat of one of them.
It's my goat.
I think importantly, a pygmy goat.
It was a
Pygmy
pig.
goat.
Yeah.
Pretty annoying goat is my recollection.
You're just trying to ham it up. This goat did nothing to you, like.
Let the listeners be the judge of the behaviour of the goat and the appropriateness of the choices of them what rode it.
We're just giving it away for free now. This is basically the vibe of that whole episode.
There isn't a whole hour and a half more of that.
And there are different dumb voices from me. Some of them even dumber.
Oh my god. So it's my first game of Dungeons and Dragons ever, to my partner's like horror, because he'd been trying to convince me to play this for like 9 years that we've been together. He's so filthy at me right now. But what is absolutely not surprising is how hilarious Tennant is as a dungeon master, and how much Luke and I's relationship on this little quest kind of brings out some of the like cute little nuances of our actual relationship. It's so great. I loved it. And the pygmy goat, well, who doesn't love a pygmy goat?
Almost nobody.
Almost nobody.
All right. So if you're intrigued by any of that, you can head on over to patreon.com/Let Me Sum Up for that, and a whole bunch of more on-theme content on climate and energy policy and politics that we've been releasing over the course of 2024, and you'll have a exciting stream of more of that sort of content to come, including potentially another D&D episode at some point in the future, because there's more of the adventure to come, I think we can say, and I don't think we need to say any more than that. All right, we have some Wonky awards to hand out. What are the Wonky Awards? At the conclusion of 2022, we handed out our first Wonky Award, which is our gong for the best climate and energy paper of the year. The process is simple. We each nominate a paper we covered on the podcast over the course of the year. We make our case for why it was the year's best, and we decide our winner live on the show. Maximum transparency. I don't think any of us actually know what we're going to give the award to. We know what each of us are nominating. Is there any more colour we need to add to this scenario before we leap in?
Well, just to bring out that it is the best paper that we've covered. We can't cover everything. And so if you, dear listener, think that we've missed a trick on another paper that was even better, send it to us and maybe we can cover it next year.
And should we maybe mention how we've kind of decided on what papers we would consider for this award? Like, we were teasing that out a little bit via text message the last few days, because every year this rolls around, we're like, is it just about impact? Is it about the pros of the thing? Or is it a combination of all of those things? I think we've agreed it's a combination of a few different factors.
I think there is a magical alchemy to what wins the Wonky Award. I don't think any of the three of us entirely agree on the relative weighting of those various elements. Something which may come out in the discussion that we have over the next 20 minutes or so. But let's find out. I'm going to kick us off with my pitch for the 2024 Wonky, and I'm going to do so by taking us all back to the start of the year, to, I think, our very first episode of the year, in which we discussed a little paper called Cleaner, Cheaper to Run Cars, the Australian New Vehicle Efficiency Standard. Now, going to that exact question, does this paper rate highly on style? No, it doesn't. Does it deliver novel insights that have lived on in our imagination over the course of those many months since we discussed it on the pod? Not so much.
You're really selling it there, Mental.
I'll tell you what it is. It is an example of a paper that got the job done after multiple false starts in the effort to introduce vehicle fuel efficiency standards in this country. And I can think of no better way of making that point than reading a small sample of the reports grappling with this topic from a list compiled by the Parliamentary Library in Canberra, a list that starts in March 2009 with the Australian Transport Council's report, which found a prima facie case for introducing mandatory CO2 emission standards. Then in July 2009, the National Strategy on Energy Efficiency committed to undertaking a regulatory impact statement, or a RIS, for introducing emission standards for light vehicles. November 2009, another National Transport Commission report made the point that Australia's carbon emissions from new passenger vehicles and light commercial vehicles were 41% higher than the EU's. July 2010, the government committed to introducing new mandatory CO2 emission standards for all new light vehicles from 2015. Way back in 2010, the first RIS on this topic for light vehicles emission standards was released. March 2014, the Productivity Commission recommended accelerating efforts to harmonise vehicle standards. June 2014, the Climate Change Authority recommended the same thing. August 2014, the government response to the Productivity Commission report supported accelerated harmonisation with other jurisdictions. This was going nowhere, so in October 2015, there was a ministerial forum on vehicle emissions formed to coordinate a whole-of-government approach to addressing emissions from road vehicles. February 2016, vehicle emissions discussion paper released. December 2016, another draft RIS on vehicle emissions standards. Then the trail goes cold. We can jump forward now to June 2019, a full 10 years after they had initially stuck their oar in on this topic. The National Transport Commission found the emissions intensity of Australian passenger vehicles are 45% higher than equivalent European vehicles. Yes, we have been talking about this for 15 interminable years, but the last paper on that long list is different because it got a result. In February 2024, the government released the consultation impact analysis for the Australian New Vehicle Efficiency Standard. And this is not the most mind-blowing paper that we have read on this podcast. It is not grappling with a new and groundbreaking area of policy reform. But you know what? Sometimes you have to eat your vegetables, right? And this paper was a critical milestone in a process that got a no-brainer reform done that has been pursued over many years. And over coming years, it will start to bring down transport emissions, which are projected to become our largest source of emissions by 2030. So I don't want to hear about fine words. I don't want to hear about building border adjustments out of clouds. Let's talk about impact. And on that basis,
let's talk mileage.
The consultation impact analysis for the Australian New Vehicle Efficiency Standard should win the Wonkie for 2024.
Or at least be the next model from Volvo. Unexciting, but very functional.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Oh, look, I can get behind the idea of this paper marking a shift in the policy landscape. I guess I'm kind of less convinced that that the paper itself was super critical to all of this, and that it was actually more of a product of a policy to do something on this was, as you sort of pointed out, so far overdue. Post-election, there's sort of enough momentum to get it going. I think the relevant stakeholders knew, its time has come, and to the extent that the paper is a manifestation of all of those things. And I can get behind that. And I agree with your point on impact would be my modest concession at this point, Menzel. I, however, am going to put forward another contender. And I think it addresses both a real kind of contribution on the impact front and also kind of shaping the national discussion about ambition and how we're going to meet our targets. Targets, you hear me say? Well, yes, I am referring to the Climate Change Authority's paper, their 2024 issues paper, Targets, Pathways and Progress. And we covered this one, I think it was in April early this year. It was put out for consultation, I think. And you remember it had a memorable title for our episode. We called it the Goldilocks number. Which 2035 target is just right? And really that, I think, speaks to some really good, I think, Luke, you called it thinking out loud, but the way the paper kind of set out lots of different rationales you can step through to try and figure out what 2035 target makes sense for Australia? How do we situate ourselves in, where global ambition needs to be? What's going to align us to a 1.5 degree trajectory? What plays into, Australia's strengths when it comes to our, renewable resources? Where do we sit with respect to state and territory commitments? So, it mapped all of that out, and I think it just provided a kind of fascinating landscape for discussion. But I think the other thing that's really super fascinating and interesting is the other components of this paper that are stepped out too. It wasn't just about the 2035 target. It was also giving a little preview into how we're kind of tracking across the economy with emissions, abatement, and spoiler alert, not great across, vast chunks. And this was sort of one of the CCA's first, I think it might have been the first paper that they'd done where they, according to those 6 sectoral strategies or pathways that we're expecting to come out soon, they started to kind of set out the case and the change that needed to happen across each of those sectors. So in my view, the CCA, what they've done with this paper and, the couple that have then sort of come out subsequently are really kind of leading the national discussion, like much more so than, the CCA was doing under the former government. Obviously didn't get support and resourcing it probably needed during that period. But I do think this paper, the update, the progress report at the end of the year are very deliberately mapping out and kind of exploring this terrain very openly. That sort of one is talking about the level of ambition we need to have across the economy, starting to unpick the various issues, within each sectors, and then have some quite specific, sensible things to say about, potential policy reform within each of those sectors that tracks back to this target. So I just think it was a really great paper in terms of really starting to lead rather than respond to a national conversation about ambition. And to my mind, that I think just represents a real kind of gear shift in the role of the CCA. I'm that's not been without its fraughtness in kind of getting trapped up in election cycles and things like that. But I think they've navigated that very well. For mine, just really great to see an agency like that is, more independent from governments, providing some fearless, frank advice for everyone to absorb. So I commend it to you as one that has really shaped a lot of the discussion this year on climate and climate ambition.
I think that's a very fine paper. I think the meat and potatoes of the vehicle standards paper is also very good. I've got to put a paper on the table, and I don't think there was ever any doubt as to what I was going to put on the table.
Oh, we're all hanging by a thread.
Although, there could have been a basis for doubt, because while the CCA may have done a lot to shape the wider climate conversation, no paper has done more to shape the conversation on this here podcast than the long awaited second consultation paper of the carbon linkage review, which became a running joke on this podcast. I never stopped believing that this paper would come out, but when it did finally come out, it was not Star Wars Episode 1. It was actually very good in its own right. It's a paper that confronts a problem that has been a significant one in Australian climate policy making and other polities facing the same fundamental issues. How do you increase the pressure for emissions reductions from major parts of industry without seeing industry leave Australia, directly or indirectly, for jurisdictions with policies that don't impose the same kinds of constraint or burden. And how do you do that in a more sustainable way than the free allocation of emissions rights that has been the main go-to for governments worried about this issue in the past? And it's a paper that is a sort of really a model of clear thinking and clear writing on what are the options, what are their pluses, what are their minuses, what looks like actually quite a promising option. And of course, it's a carbon border adjustment mechanism that is the greatest focus here, but then going through some of the key design issues, the challenges that need to be navigated, and laying out some new work on the quantitative significance of these issues to different sectors, different products, and the impact that a border adjustment might have. So like the targets review issues paper, we don't have an outcome here yet, unlike the vehicle efficiency standard, where something has been done at the end of well, depending on where you count from, a very long policy process. But we have a piece of work here that is like in the second paper of the leakage review, a significant intellectual contribution to a policy debate that has been like a key roadblock every time Australia has thought about a serious tightening of climate policy over the past 15 to 20 years. And it's a contribution that, you know, I don't think it's going to be definitively resolved in this side of the next federal election, but it's work that the next government will need to come back to and make some decisions on. So, of course, I would say all that because I have been crouched, golem-like in my dark cave, pining after my precious for what feels like a century, maybe 3,000 years, but it's actually a good piece of work, I thought. What did you guys think? And should we have some further discussion of each of these papers?
I actually liked both of those papers, both the other nominations. I think they were both well written, I agree, and interesting in their own right. And I enjoyed talking about them on the podcast. I think the carbon leakage review in particular was just it's unusual for a report issued by government to have that clarity of thinking that was evident in the carbon leakage review. Just very well crafted prose, setting out the issues for an audience that is not necessarily expert in all the intricacies of how one would adjust trade settings and tariff settings to address these complex climate policy issues. So from that perspective, really good. I also thought it was very deft in the way that it dealt with a range of very distinct and different stakeholders that were caught up in the review. It was very clear that there'd been a lot of work behind the scenes and through the consultation process to properly understand the implications of this mechanism and quite nuanced recommendations in terms of timing and staging for when one would adopt this policy and the implications for different subsectors along the way. So I thought that was great. And you're right, Frankie. I really appreciate the Climate Change Authority almost giving itself license to think out loud about tricky problems. That issues paper from early in the year was kind of a grab bag of fun blue sky thinking, right? He's giving us a bit of a framework for thinking about potential balancing of, deliverability and ambition in terms of climate targets. Think about how one might structure such a target, throwing in the idea of, well, do we all the projections suggest, carbon dioxide removals need to play some significant role in the future trajectory of achieving and maintaining net zero emissions. Do we need a target for that? That is a pretty big idea to throw out into the market, and building on some of the other work that the CCA has done. But, it sort of ventilates thinking in a way that is, I think, helpful for the public conversation and for experts getting their head around where the climate debate not just is, but where it might be going, regardless of the outcome of the debate that we're about to have. The CCA to continue thinking out loud, because I think it's really healthy and helpful for public debate.
I'd agree with that.
Oh, so we're agreed that CCA wins the Wonky for 2024.
That's so fast, Frankie.
Can I just say, we have somehow set up a face-off between the Department of Transport, the Climate Change Authority, and DQ for the Wonky Award.
Well, it's like a Kong versus Godzilla versus Mothra battle of the Titans, isn't it?
All right, we need to knock someone out. I made a passionate case, but I wasn't really feeling a lot of love on the text thread for vehicle efficiency standards as the winner.
Well, if I was going to go negative on vehicle efficiency standards, I'd say that what you established, Luke, was not that this policy was this paper was the crowning achievement of a long intellectual battle, that instead this paper was the Stephen Bradbury of vehicle efficiency. All the other efforts fell over and this one didn't, and it wins by default in the policy stakes. I think that's far too negative.
I didn't go quite that far with my comments to it, but yes.
Yeah, no, you didn't, because you are a person of taste and humanity. But I actually think that meat and potatoes is really important, and that the nuances of the approach to doing vehicle standards that were in this paper did actually matter for navigating the incredibly delicate dance of, being able to have some ministers standing beside some car industry people to say, yes, we agree that this is a good thing, and to then get a majority of the Senate to vote for it, and not have a blow up inside the government of the day. Those are things that nobody else in Australia ever achieved. And how much of that is taking place inside the paper versus inside the departments versus inside the ministerial offices or whatever? It's all of a piece.
Yeah, it's a milestone in the process. And to be fair, what I'm sort of trying to bend the Wonkies into doing is to give an award for best policy achievement of 2024, which is not technically what they are.
No.
So I am happy to fall on my sword and let that one go if it helps us get to an outcome sometime soon.
Okay. Well, so if we're cutting out vehicle efficiency standards, I think for the same, for the reasons, Tam, that you just identified, that you maybe wouldn't go with vehicle efficiency standards, we could kind of make a similar argument on our beloved CBAM paper, because I think...
tell me more.
No, just to the point that it actually hasn't done anything yet.
That's true.
So I think I agree
Except toy with my emotions.
That's right. And provide a lot of fodder for this podcast to tease you about for the last 12 months, which, look,
Gotta feed the beast.
Is worth a lot, but I don't think it's worth a wonky.
Where's the wonky for the collected works of my introductions to Tenet
right.
over the course of the year, which I think collated would be equivalent in word count to one of the shorter papers we do.
That's more of a Booker entry, isn't it? Or possibly an Oscar.
Let's give Menzel a highly commended.
Oh, brutal.
No, I think I'm trying to be nice. I agreed with I think a lot of what Luke said about the paper, and that I thought it was incredibly well written and clear in its thinking, and it was also really clear, as you said, Luke, how it had evidently balanced quite a lot of very varied stakeholder views. The other thing I thought it did really well, and very intentionally so, was to give examples of how such a mechanism might play out in actuality to sort of, to let's cool everyone's jets and I think try and get ahead of any potential fear mongering about what a BOCA or a CBAM might do if it was actually put in place. So I think that is all super important and necessary work. Just, we haven't, it's it just sort of feels like we're just not quite there yet. And it's really good foundational thinking.
Yeah, but if you're going off the paper and you're saying impact, like yes, facilitating debate is the Climate Change Authority's achievement. But there is no specific impact that one can point to coming out of your report either.
We don't have a target yet.
No, but
and I blame the Climate Change Authority. No, I don't blame the Climate Change Authority for that.
I mean, what I would say, though, is that there's I think now firm expectation around the level of ambition that there needs to be in a 2035 target. I think there's a range that's been put out there.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if that's true. So, again, I don't think I can blame the paper for this in any way, but I don't know that the public debate in Australia on a 2035 target has moved along quite as far as we would wish that it had.
As the debate on this podcast.
Yeah.
Well, yes.
Well, I mean, there is a little bubble in which, we've been talking about, and others in the community have been talking about that range,
yes.
And it has been significant in shaping the thinking of interested experts.
Yes.
But in terms of the political debate in Australia, I don't think those numbers have any meaning and have lodged in anyone's minds.
Whereas every parrot in the pet shop can tell you all about the intricacies of border adjustment mechanisms.
I was really? You're going to make that
okay,
argument?
Maybe not.
It's like a tiny bubble within the medium-sized bubble of industry within the larger bubble of CCA.
I think both of you are on pretty shaky ground making an argument on impact.
I agree with that.
Having knocked my paper out of the running.
No, that's fair enough. Look, I quite like I said, I enjoyed the CBAM paper. It was the other one that I probably would have fought for. So, am I going to say I'm going to be equally satisfied if the CBAM paper wins out? No, because I still think the CCA have done more to advance the broader discussion about climate action. And, BOCA is, I'm sorry, Tennant, it is like a smaller piece of the puzzle.
Ooh.
So,
Okay, here's my case to you, Frankie, for why among two intellectually interesting papers, neither of which has yet achieved a definitive real-world outcome, why of those two, in many ways similar papers, the Carbon Leakage Review paper has the edge. And the reason is this. The real point of addressing carbon leakage is not the minutiae of trade or industry composition. It is to unlock ambition. in macro policy for the decarbonisation of Australia or any other nation confronting the same problems. The point is to create confidence that a country can push harder on the accelerator for decarbonisation and not see the economic and political conditions for decarbonisation policy to be sustained be undermined. And so in the end, a good outcome on the targets question that the CCA is dealing with depends on the fundamental confidence that the carbon leakage review is aiming to build and to shore up. And so these are two great tastes that taste great together, but the vanilla ice cream on which the chopped nuts of the targets paper can be sprinkled.
Oh, no.
I love chopped nuts. They're great. They need a sturdy base to lie upon, and that base is confidence that there won't be carbon leakage. How's that?
I mean,
how do you like them apples?
I mean, my response to
Where's
that...
your food-based metaphor?
Yeah. My response to that is that ultimately I think a Boca is the maraschino cherry on top of a CCA sundae, but...
I'm getting hungry.
Yeah.
What are we talking about again?
What about you, Menzel? Because, like, I can see the merits in both.
I'm leaning slightly towards carbon leakage review.
Oh.
One of the things that I'm conscious of with that paper is it's kind of cohered into a really compelling analysis of a specific issue. I really loved the CCA paper, but it was kind of a grab bag of stuff, which is not a criticism. It's kind of what it was designed to do. But as a paper, I think that the carbon leakage review actually hangs together better, and I do think it makes a significant contribution to moving the debate forward in what has been another incredibly vexed policy area. So yes, I am leaning that way, and I do think there is something poetic about you getting the movie and Tennant getting the Wonky.
I was going to say, on the basis that we're about to talk about my beloved Princess Mononoke, I'm okay with the old Boca paper getting this one. I think it was a great paper, and I think I really enjoyed reading it. I think it made actually quite a technical subject really accessible to people who don't spend all their time like one of us on this podcast thinking about CBAMs.
So basically everybody.
Yeah.
Wants it.
Yeah.
Needs it. Must have the CBAM.
I think it deserves the Wonky. Let's do it.
All right. It is my great pleasure to announce the winner of the 2024 Wonky Award for Best Climate and Energy Paper, the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, and importantly, Frank Yotzo as the lead author for the Carbon Leakage Review Second Consultation Paper. Congratulations. And congratulations to our runners-up, the 2024 Issues Paper Targets, Pathways and Progress from the Climate Change Authority, and also to that incredibly impactful intervention in Australia's climate policy landscape, whose effects will reverberate through the decades long after this episode is forgotten. Cleaner, cheaper to run cars, the Australian New Vehicle Efficiency Standard, consultation impact analysis from the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communications and the Arts.
Not a Stephen Bradbury.
No.
The triumphant final runner in a relay race that has been on foot for 20 years.
Shall we chat about a movie?
We should.
It's time.
1997 saw the release of Princess Mononoke, a historical fantasy film set in feudal Japan and directed by acclaimed filmmaker Hayao Miyazaki. This stunning anime is an extended meditation on the relationship between human progress and environmental destruction. It imagines a world in which giant animal gods still roam the forests of Japan, actively resisting attempts at domination and resource extraction from ascendant human populations. The story revolves around three central characters. The first is Lady Eboshi, the leader of Irontown, a settlement which both processes iron and manufactures firearms. Irontown is improving the well-being of marginalised groups taken in by Lady Eboshi. However, it is also having a dramatic impact on the local environment and is locked in a war of attrition with the old animal gods who are attempting to protect the forest. The second is San, the titular Princess Mononoke, a woman raised in the forest by wolf gods and the spearhead of the resistance against Lady Eboshi. She is furious at the wanton destruction wrought by her human kin and determined to stop them at all costs. The third is Ashitaka, a prince from a distant part of Japan. He is drawn into this struggle when a boar god shot by Lady Eboshi is transformed into a demon and rampages across the countryside, eventually attacking his village. Ashitaka defeats the demon, but in the process is cursed. He sets out on a journey to understand the source of the misfortune that has befallen him and find a cure if he can. Frankie, there's a lot going on in this movie.
Yep.
Before we get to that, I'm interested to know why you were so excited to discuss it.
There are two reasons I love this movie. One of them is it doesn't try to oversimplify the themes that it's engaging with. Like, actually, there are no characters in this movie that are good or bad or evil or, heavenly. Like, if you deal in shades of grey, this movie has every possible shade for the watcher. And I think that's also kind of remarkable for the point in time at which this movie was made. If you're used to Western movies and cinema, I just think that compared to the stuff that, Disney might have been putting out at the time, it is so complex and kind of nuanced in the way that it's engaging in not just the topics of environmentalism, but also leadership, how you deal and process with emotion as well. And the other reason I'm sure we're going to get into that. The other reason I really love this movie is that it's also it's a feminist movie. Like, women are in leadership roles in this movie, which is also really striking, I think, for something that was made in the mid-90s. You just don't have to go back very far, or even just to sort of consider movies that were contemporary to this to realise that, it was ahead of its time in that regard, and that's a bit sad, but I just loved that a lot of the lead characters that you just stepped through, Luke, are women, particularly in the kind of roles they are. Whereas I think if they'd been made in your bulk average kind of Western cinema flick, they would have been blokes.
It was really striking when I was trying to think about how to set this movie up for someone that hasn't seen it. The movie actually starts with Ashitaka, and he's the thread through the movie, the protagonist that the audience actually follows. But the actual scenario, which is at the heart of the movie, is actually this conflict between these two incredibly powerful women with just completely divergent views or priorities about what is valuable in this conflict and what should be prioritised in this conflict. It's actually them and the factions that they represent that kind of form the heart of this movie. And in some ways, Ashitaka is not uninteresting, but one of the three, I find him the least interesting character. Yeah. But I think that's almost by design, right?
He's the negotiator, right? Like, he's trying to be a bit of a peace broker between San, or Princess Mononoke, and Lady Eboshi, who is the leader of this town that's started an iron forge and is making weapons and chopping down trees in the forest, prompting the ire of the forest gods. So I agree. I think the two characters I find more fascinating are the women. What about you, Tennant?
So, this is a really, really interesting movie, and it is a lot more complex than most other, not just most other animated movies, just most other movies. There's not a vast amount of room for shades of grey in much of cinema, and this is it is hard to be wholly sympathetic to anybody. The actions of the old gods and their followers and San are often frustrating in their stubbornness, their refusal to concede anything. Lady Eboshi and the people of Irontown are, they are sympathetic in some ways, and they are doing some terrible things. In an interview with Miyazaki from around the time of the release of the film, he sheds some further light on like making people even more complex when he says, so one of the other conflicts that's going on is Irontown is being regularly attacked by a feudal lord and his samurai, and in the text of the movie itself, they just seem like greedy, violent patriarchs who are crushing this, or seeking to crush this settlement of enlightened women and outcast lepers and some more sympathetic men who know their place. But Miyazaki says the iron making process that Irontown is using involves producing a huge amount of sediment and mud that gets washed downstream, damaging the livelihoods of those who are growing rice downstream. And he says when the samurai attack Tataraba, they're not doing something bad, they're doing something rightful. So you just at every point have to go, oh no, but both sides. So this is in some ways the most ultra-centrist movie that we could have watched. And Ashitaka might be an ultra-centrist icon. He sees value on all sides. He doesn't want to just pick a side and go with it. How much does he achieve in that process? Arguably quite a lot, but it's frustrating along the way for people who want sort of more decisive action.
I had exactly the same thought. You stole my line. That I think that Ashitaka is kind of like maybe one of the few cinematic ultra-centrist heroes. And it's interesting because he's accepted on both sides. There is also skepticism on both sides, but he's able to walk between these two worlds, which otherwise are pretty impermeable. There's not sort of, any of the old gods hanging out in Irontown or humans that feel safe. They're actually very threatened by being in the old forest. But he's kind of fearless, and partly because of his curse, right? I think he has an otherworldly aspect to him. Perhaps even more so than Princess Mononoke. He's kind of like the bridge between these two worlds because he's got a element of the supernatural to him, but he's also very firmly a human, and so he's being able to be accepted on both sides. And a lot of the movie hinges on, and perhaps why my 11-year-old son, who I watched it with a couple of nights ago, was getting bored at times. It's like the conversations he's having with the other protagonists in the movie, really calling on their better natures. And he's not necessarily, it's interesting, he's not proposing solutions as much as he's saying, what you're doing is really destructive and there's got to be a better way. He's not saying, you should do this and I have the solution. It's just like, you should just stop this really destructive thing you're doing and then we should kind of try and work it out. Because while we're just doing stupid stuff, like it's just the cycle is being perpetuated. And I found that really affecting. And it was really fascinating because I watched this. It's one of my favourite movies as well, Frankie. And I watched this, I think in the early 2000s, at the Astor Cinema. I was beginning to be a fan of Miyazaki. I had not seen this movie. All I knew about it was as a Miyazaki movie, and I had seen sort of most of his oeuvre is actually much more focused on children. This is a grown-up movie, right?
Yeah.
With grown-up themes. And I was just seeing it for the first time on the big screen, completely spellbound by this movie. And most of the times I've watched it, I've just let it wash over me. Watching it for this podcast, it was incredibly striking how easy it was to map different factions within the climate and environment movement onto the different characters across the movie. And some of that was definitely intentional on Miyazaki's part. But even like comparing and contrasting it to the movie we did last year, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, there's total resonances between Princess Mononoke and How to Blow Up a Pipeline in terms of the positions that different factions within the movement are taking. It's super interesting.
Yeah. Just to talk about another element, and it's like some of the editorial, like the reason I think Miyazaki's decision to put women into those leadership roles is just sort of adds then another dimension to how you think about this. But I think putting Lady Eboshi into that leadership role of the human village that's creating iron weapons and things like that. I think the way the viewer would engage with that role and the town's impact on the environment would be very different if it was a bloke. In that it would just be, well, of course this bloke is, pillaging the forest. Like and maybe this is my female perspective coming at it. But I think it forces the watcher to look at what she is doing as a leader of that town and interrogate it a little more and understand the nuance because of the fact that it's unexpected that it's a woman leading the town, and a couple of other things that are thrown in there narrative-wise for you to go, oh, this isn't just, an evil town like Overlord pillaging the forest over there to make industry. It's also made, apparent to the viewer that she has created employment opportunities for more marginalised people within her town and community. So there are lepers and disabled people that are shown as having been given so specific tasks and jobs, employment in, or making guns. But just in a way that I also think is very striking and throws an element on her role as a leader and seeking to give opportunity there. And then I think reading that same interview that Tennant was talking about, which I hadn't read before, but, is also an amazing extra insight into the thinking there, is that what he's done with that role is like, well, because, it's not a bloke in that. And then so it's not then so easy to just decide that bad people have ruined this forest, because Miyazaki said in this interview, like, that's not what humans have been doing. It's not bad people who are destroying forests. It's hardworking people who've been doing it. And then he makes the point that during the Edo era, beautiful forests were raised, but that was because trees were being planted to finance like a feudal regime. So even that isn't as simple, as people with good environmental intentions. Like, people were making money off of planting forests and keeping them there. So I just think, as you say, there's got complexity at every turn, and I think he's deliberately invoked some more complexity in putting women into those key roles, because I think it then really prompts people to think a little deeper about the role of the particular character and what they're doing. And in this instance with Lady Eboshi, I think, there's the wrong simplistic view that she's just evil and ripping down trees to run an iron forge. But what she's been doing is supporting her, her people to have industry, to have employment, to have jobs, to create a better life. Like, there aren't bad intentions springing from that.
It's making very explicit that trade-off that we talk about on the podcast pretty regularly between kind of economic development and environmental impacts, which is kind of almost at the heart of all the things that the movement's been grappling with over the last 100 years or so, and to make that trade-off incredibly and evocatively manifest through, as you say, taking in the lepers, but also going around and buying up contracts of former prostitutes and giving them work that they're very happy to do and very happy to be safe within the iron forge, like incredibly sympathetic. But then you're like a scene or two later, you're looking at the destruction that's being wrought as a result of this economic activity and the misery it's causing to these the animal gods and also the animal populations that live in the forests. And you're like, oh, this is very uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable because it's like it's a reflection of the reality that we're all living in. So like my overriding kind of feeling watching this movie is that, you know, it doesn't offer up solutions. And you know, I think to the point you were making earlier about Ashitaka, Miyazaki also says this in the interview as well. He's like, it's not like we can just coexist with nature as long as we live humbly and we destroy it because we become greedy. When we recognize that even living humbly destroys nature, we don't know what to do. So it does put you in this uncomfortable area where, like, there just are no simple answers here, and everything comes at a cost, whether it's immediately visible, you know, or only becomes so when you look further afield. And I love the movie for really kind of laying that out. And beautifully too. Like the other thing we haven't touched on is, like, obviously it's a Miyazaki movie, and the animation is so beautiful to look at.
I think that it's a Miyazaki movie, and they all look great, but I think this is the best.
Yeah.
Like it is top of the leaderboard, and a leaderboard packed with bangers, but it is amazing.
So, one of the, like, there's so much in this movie that is resonant with debates about various environmental topics. And one of the things that Miyazaki does in this movie is sort of make us, put us in a situation where everybody's self-mythologization is true at the same time, that the industrialists really are creating the opportunity and for a better life for the underprivileged, and the environmentalists really do have a true original sort of spirituality of nature that is being, like, literally murdered by the industrial activities. And in this world, both of those things are true at the same time. And, you know, Lady Eboshi is not just a thin girl boss veneer on top of the brutal industrial machine presented in, say, Avatar, which didn't score a lot of votes in the decision process for doing this movie, but has, like, you know, some similar stuff going on with a lot less complexity. But a question that we should maybe ask is, Miyazaki is like presenting these irreconcilable truths and not really presenting solutions per se. And
that's coming in Princess Mononoke too. Centurism strikes back.
Well, if he unretires himself again, maybe so. But is he doing something useful in inviting us to step back and feel deeply how difficult yet beautiful everything is? Or is he buying too much into the reality of a simple trade-off that doesn't need to be so brutal and black and white as it is? Like, there's shades of grey in everything else in this movie, but there does seem to be a very, very clear trade-off between if you develop economically, you destroy nature. And there's a room for a little bit of living in greater harmony. Like at the end of the movie, the great forest spirit has been killed. He's dismembered, but then he's restored, and there is a little bit of healing of the region, but it has been sort of magically thinned. There is much less of the sacredness and the ancient magic than there was, and it's pretty clear that I think it felt clear to me that there never would again be what there was. It's it is a simple trade-off, and does it need to be? There are better ways to make iron, for example.
Are you looking for a forest spirit border adjustment mechanism, Tennant?
Maybe some forest spirit. Maybe there's more room for forest spirits if you're making your iron with direct reduction. Or electrolysis of molten oxide electrolysis. You can do things better or worse as well as doing more or less.
So I have two thoughts. One is that there was something that was resonant to me watching this movie again. About this time last year, I reread all of Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion, and I'm now listening to Lord of the Rings again with my son. And there's a bit of the elder days are coming to an end, and the age of men is about to begin.
Yep. To
this. That is a big theme in Lord of the Rings. The age of magic is passing, and it's going to be up to the men. And the men, quote unquote, see 1950s Tolkien, humanity. It's going to be up to humanity to kind of work stuff out from now on. And there's a little bit of that to this movie. I think you're underselling the journey that both San, Princess Mononoke, and Lady Eboshi go on in this journey. I think by the end of the movie, they've both moved quite a long way. And I think for most of the movie, Ashitaka is very frustrated with them because neither of them are willing to give any sort of ground. They are seeing everything as black and white. They're refusing to see the grey. I think by the end, they are both kind of ready to have the conversation. And interestingly, Ashitaka commits to going back to Irontown to work with them to rebuild, and Mononoke goes back to the forest, but they're clearly on very good terms. They've worked together to restore the head of the great forest spirit, the dear god, to sort of, the big bad, to the degree that there is one, is this sort of globulous, Godzilla giant that's striding through the forest, threatening to destroy everything once the god's head is removed. And they recapture the head and give it back to the gods. And they say it's really important that the humans give this back to the gods. And it's an offering back to the gods and a joining of the two worlds. And I feel like there's a basis by the end of the movie and the comments that both Mononoke and Lady Eboshi make that they're ready to start the conversation. And that's where the movie finishes. And I actually felt by the end of the movie quite optimistic that there would be a basis for that interaction moving forward. But it is not in this movie. It's just the movie gets you to the point. But there is a lot that's lost along the way. And you're dealing with a landscape which is a lesser landscape than there was before. Many beautiful things have gone away, but they've got the little
Kodama.
Yeah, the Kodama. These very cute little glowing little forest spirits whose head sort of shake like bobbleheads. They're the original bobblehead, I guess. Yeah. And they've been sort of, through the course of this dramatic final battle, sort of falling from the trees, and it all looks really disastrous. All their cute friends are dying, and then at the very end of the movie, there's a Kodama that reappears and his head shakes. And you go, oh. I feel like there's a basis for optimism at the end of the film.
It gives a little. I agree. I think it gives someone who wants to leave this movie feeling optimistic something to grab onto, in that they're not going to be operating into siloed worlds anymore. There's also like that role for Ashitaka being critical to that, at least in the near term, right? Kind of continuing to be that kind of go-between and broker. But you can see the direction of travel, starting to dovetail together. I think it does give you that basis for optimism, but I don't know. Like, do I consider myself an optimistic person? By and large, yes. But I think that the diminishment in the magic of the forest and that is also not lost on me. So I think in a way, I feel like there's actually maybe the most honest kind of portrayal that he could have, or the treatment that he could have given the situation, and that there is some cause for hope, but it's not as though, the landscape and the world that those future generations are inheriting are untouched, by what's happened. And that's probably the bit that I maybe chose to dwell on more than the hopeful aspects.
It's a movie that's got a lot in it. And, compared to, I don't know, Ninja Scroll, and another very successful anime from the 90s, there's a lot more to stroke your chin on in Princess Mononoke than a lot of other movies.
Are you still mad at my vicious campaign to see us watch this movie rather than Soylent Green?
Look, to quote Miyazaki, I think that unless we put ourselves in the place where we don't know what to do and start from there, we cannot think about environmental issues or issues concerning nature. And so, confronted with this brutal conflict between forces that have each of them a good case to make for themselves, we will just have to find some way to live together. Or maybe I'm just one of the boars in the army of the old gods who's lying bleeding and defeated at the foot of a mountainside while Lady Frankoshi yells in triumph above.
There is a version of that I quite enjoy the imagery of in my head.
As always, we close out the show with one more thing, in which we all share something worthy of captivating your attention this holiday season. Tennant, what have you got?
So, I'm going to be a little bit of a bastard on this one because I'm going to recommend something that's very, very good, but it's quite hard to track down. So if you like the sound of what I'm about to describe, you are going to have to do a little bit of legwork to find a viewable copy. My one more thing is Orson Welles' film essay, F for Fake, released in 1973. It's the last movie-length project that he actually completed, even though he lived for a good while after. He started a lot of things without, for one reason or another, being able to finish them. This is a movie about fakes and forgeries and art and truth and the human spirit. It's one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. It's one of the best edited works of cinema I've ever seen. It features Orson Welles talking to camera a lot as he tells us the story of an art forger named Elmire and his biographer, who himself later, after a successful biography of the art forger, became infamous for forging the autobiography of Howard Hughes. And it's just it's a movie that takes you in a short span from the undermining of confidence in expertise, which is a topic that is as relevant today as it was 50 years ago, to the eternal beauty of things that may not actually be eternal at all, to absolute outright fabrication. It's just wonderful. It's not streaming on any Australian platform. If you want to see it, you're going to have to get yourself a VPN and a subscription to the Criterion channel, or find a copy in the US, or find yourself a copy of the DVD or Blu-ray of this from the Criterion collection. Or maybe once every decade, SBS will broadcast it. I don't know. But I promise you, it will be worthwhile. F for fake. Orson Welles. Go.
Sounds like we need to start a tier of the Patreon, which allows us to come over to your house to watch it, Tenor.
There's a high dollar number on total subscriber revenue to reach that tier, but yes, I'm willing to commit.
All right, sounds great. I'm not promising that I'll jump through all those hoops, but if I have the opportunity, I'll check that movie out. Frankie, what have you got?
I wanted to do a little shout out for a podcast. I'm sure I've mentioned perhaps on this pod before. It may have had to do with a passing reference to the dreamy voice of the host of said podcast. It's called 99% Invisible, and it's hosted by a guy called Roman Mars. And it's a design, so it's about design, and it's about kind of the
Roman Mars.
Oh, it's yes, and his voice sounds just as good as his name suggests. Like, he's my favorite podcast to go to sleep listening to. If anyone else out there uses podcasts as effectively bedtime stories, Roman and Mars is mine. But that is not to detract from the delightful subjects that this podcast covers. So it's all about design. A lot of it is about just the everyday design that's kind of all throughout our lives, and probably just a lot of places where you just wouldn't normally notice it either. So they do weekly episodes, and so it's sort of about that power of design, a lot of architecture, themed discussions as well. But there's just some real crackers out there. One is around raccoon resistance, an episode about trash cans and the battle waged between the town of Toronto and the kind of war against raccoons raiding people's bins and stuff. And there's all kinds of hilarity and cuteness there. But they also talk about early work of businesses of Sears and Roebuck whose catalogue was kind of like the proto-Amazon or IKEA, that they had sort of shipped a vast array of household items across America, including self-assembled houses. Anyway, it's fascinating stuff, and it's just such a great podcast, and it puts out episodes weekly. I always find it super interesting to listen to. And my sneaky twofer, although I haven't read it yet, but I imagine some of our Summerupperers are into the old quarterly essay show. I've currently downloaded on my Kindle, but haven't started reading yet, George Megalogenis's latest effort called Minority Report, The New Shape of Australian Politics. And so this is for the politics wonks out there, of which I'm sure many of you are. He sort of meditated on through a few different essays over the last little while, using a lot of insights around just changing demographics in Australia and how that's kind of factoring into our political landscape. And he, contended the last election was the death of the two-party system, as we had known it for a really long time. So it's this, so I think this this quarterly essay is his kind of meditation on what the future is likely to look like in terms of the makeup of our parliament, which will be fascinating, and I'm very looking forward to reading it, hopefully over cocktails and stuff, poolside.
And I'll give our listeners a reminder, as we discussed when we read a quarterly essay earlier this year for the pod, all the recent quarterly essays, including this one I've just checked, are available on Audible as audiobooks. And so if you want to listen rather than read George Megalogenis's thoughts, and I can report he's narrated personally this particular audiobook.
Nice.
So if George Megalogenis's voice is your jam, then that could be a selling point. It's a great way of consuming what is always thought-provoking content. Hey, in 2022, I recommended a movie. In 2023, I recommended an audiobook. In 2024, I'm going to recommend a couple of video games. One is a grown-up one and one is fun for the whole family. The grown-up one is acclaimed indie platformer Celeste, which has been out for a number of years, but which I got to at the start of 2024. Think 8-bit. I think side-scrolling platformer. It's very challenging gameplay, and the story is focused on a young woman, Madeline, who is scaling a mountain, Mount Celeste in Canada. So the actual gameplay bit is incredible if you're into platformers. But what it absolutely nails is an absolutely beautiful story of the healing journey this young woman goes on, grappling with her inner demons, and the way in which those inner demons are made manifest within the game and actually become the primary antagonist for Madeline, her inner self, as she scales ever higher up the peaks is incredibly beautiful, and an example of the way that video games are kind of a very unique and special form of art in which you can kind of go on a journey with a character, particularly an emotional journey, and experience it in a way that is not possible in any other art form. So it is a classic. If you're a gamer yourself, you've probably already heard of it. But if you are not a natural gamer but have access to one of the many systems on which this game is available, but you're interested in the story bit of it, I will say that there are some very forgiving settings that make it a less painful experience for you, and then you get to experience a beautiful journey. And I don't think there is any shame in that. So that's my primary recommendation, but I'll throw in one more, which is Super Mario Wonder, which is just a delight. And I mention it because I have been playing it with my 7-year-old daughter, who has just gotten properly into gaming.
Cute.
And we have been having such a good time playing it together. It is a bonkers Mario game. I think the best way of describing it is probably Super Mario Brothers on acid, but in a very good, fun way. So that's just on the Switch, but if you have a Switch and you haven't caught up with it yet, it's worth checking out, especially if you have younger kids. All right.
That's a year.
That's a holiday special.
Sure is.
Gang. Sure is. We're taking a break for a little while, right? So we'll be back in February. But if you have thoughts in the meantime, if you have pictures for reports that we should be reading when we return, when we stop having feelings about Trump and playing D&D and talking crap about almost 30-year-old movies, we actually get back to our day job of talking about reports. You could send them to our email address. What is that, Tennant?
That is mailbag@letmesumup.net. And if you have obscure 50-year-old movie recommendations to give us, you can send it there too.
We've got enough of those.
Absolutely could. And we also have a website, letmesumup.net, which has a full back catalogue of episodes and fulsome show notes and links to all the things we talked about today, including our various pop culture recommendations to get you through January. This podcast, as a number of the recent podcasts from the last few months was edited by energy professional and podcast tragic Mark Spencer from Here Media Studio. Frankie, how do we pay for that editing?
Well, we do that through the gracious contributions of our delightful super Summerupperers who chip us a few bucks to our Patreon. And that is www.ineedaholiday.patreon.com/.
To be clear, do not type "I need a holiday" into URL for our Patreon.
That's true.
It will not take you where you want to go.
No. We really are at that.
Patreon.com/let me sum up.
It's getting there. It's going to get there. I need a holiday. So if you head on over to the place that Luke just told you to go, you can find our delightful Patreon. And if Tennant's impersonation of I don't know if that was like, where was that person? Like, whatever that was, if you're intrigued and you want to hear more, there are so many
It was
more.
from up round Cormier. Everybody knows Cormier.
If you want to hear like at least 5 to 6 variations of like crazy accents that one T Reed manifests in his other hat wearing as Dungeon Master, you should head on over to Patreon, subscribe, become a super Summerupper, and then you can get access to that sweet, sweet, delicious boko, including our recent foray into Dungeons and Dragons, which we're assuring people will not be the first and last time that we do that together.
All right.
Oh, we are so done.
We are almost done. But
Oh, we're not done, sorry.
But wait, there's more.
there is more. Before we go, we have one last treat for you. Some of you will be familiar with the NemChat singers, who have made it their mission for a number of years now to release 1 or 2 parody songs reflecting on some of the big issues in the year for our energy debate. So stick around after the closing theme of this very podcast and you'll be treated to Everybody Wants to Change the Rules, a reflection on the deep and abiding dissatisfaction with our electricity market regime, to the tune of Everybody Wants to Rule the World by 80s pop icons Tears for Fears. So we send out a big thanks to the NemChat singers, Dean Lombard, Mark Henley and the mysterious Jen Taylor, for letting us share their latest offering with all of you as one final gift for 2024. So, for Frankie Muskowicz and Tennant Reed, I'm Luke Menzel. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again in 2025.
Welcome to the NEM. There's no tuning back. barge to stop the wind blowing. And the lack of a backup plan, well, it's a showing.
As credit support. Rule change 364, clarifying mandatory primary frequency response obligations for bidirectional plant. Rule change 339, efficient provision of inertia.
AEMC makes decisions, sometimes with a future vision. Everybody wants to change the never need to inflate demand in the ESU. Everybody wants to change the rules.
Managing bias the uncertainty with ex-post reviews.
Depreciate at your leisure, 'cause all this kit won't last forever. Everybody wants to change the rules.
Earlier works, earlier. Flexibility in allocating interconnector costs. Shorter settlement cycle. Expanding transmission ring-fencing framework.
Efficient provision of inertia.